So my first examples are just going to be kind of straightforward, just to really get us thinking in terms of what it means to have a net force or a force applied to something. We won't worry about solving them mathematically, but I just want to kind of paint a picture of what we're talking about. So my first example is a book. We'll go ahead and put our book. It looks more like a box, but we'll just call that a book. And this book has this velocity at 3 meters per second. So I want you to pause this and ask yourself, is there a net force? And what direction, if there is, would that net force be? And then turn it back on. Let's see what we come up with. Okay. So I'm told that it's moving at 3 meters per second. And that's all I'm told. I'm not told that it's speeding up or slowing down. So that means in terms of forces going in this direction, they're equal and opposite. I can't say that there isn't a force acting on it. It could be that this table is totally frictionless. So like this really beautiful sheet of ice, and the book is just sliding across that on this frictionless surface. Because believe it or not, if I put anything on this perfectly smooth piece of ice, it will slide forever and ever and ever. So the only thing I can conclude as far as the forces go on this is that either of two pictures are happening in the x direction. Is that either I have like a force of friction equal and opposite with a force applied. And I don't even need to know what that is. But these two things, to maintain a constant velocity, then I would write this as my sum of my forces must equal 0. If I'm at a constant velocity, then my sum of forces must be 0 because my velocity wouldn't be changing. So the way I could write this then in terms of my x's is that I say, if I've defined up and to the right as positive, that my force applied minus the force of friction must equal 0. So that says that these two forces must equal each other to maintain a constant velocity. Or what we call this free body diagram, which is what I'm doing here, that's it in the x. There is no force. Once I get it moving, it requires a force to make it stop, to make it change direction, or to speed up. So if this is constant, then I don't know. Maybe there is no force acting on it. These are my only two options in the x. In the y, I have, let's see, what do I got going on? I have the force of gravity pulling down on it, pointing straight towards the center of the earth. And I have this thing called the force normal pushing up on it. And kind of the way you can develop an intuition of when to include a force normal, well, if it's sitting on a surface, there's a force normal between the table or the paper, however you want to look at it, and this pen. So the force of gravity is pulling down on it in the downward direction, and the force of the table, the force normal, is pushing up on it. If my pen stays stationary, if it doesn't just suddenly fly up into the air or tumble down to the floor, then that means that the force of gravity pulling the pen down and the force normal going up are equal and opposite. So if this thing isn't flying up in the air or falling down to the ground, and make a note of that in your book or your notebook or whatever you're doing, that these two things, if I'm not flying up, not shooting up, not falling down, these two things must equal each other. We'll add in if there's other forces in the y, but just hold on to that for now. So then if I wanted to complete this free body diagram, I would add in that this is the force of gravity down and I have the force normal up. If I wanted to complete this free body diagram, I have the same thing, force of gravity down, force normal up. And what I know in both of these is that if it's staying on the table, these two forces equal each other. If it's staying on the table, these two forces equal each other. If my velocity is constant, these two forces equal each other. So before I move on to this one in the next video, I do want to be a little more explicit about what this normal force is. And you can think of it as just like a contact force. Something is resting on something, or I can push up You can see my hand, I can push up against a wall. If I have contact between my hand and a wall, then I have a normal force between the wall and my hand. It is the wall pushing back on me as I'm pushing on the wall. And if I don't break the wall, then those two forces equal each other. So this force normal is really just this kind of contact force between you and something else, or something, two things interacting together. So hold on to that for now, because when we get into the force of gravity explicitly, we're going to go into some more detail on the normal. And when we go into friction explicitly is when we'll go into that. So let's do our next example.